Right now, you're probably building in Bubble and you've been hit with this dilemma. What on earth is the difference between the current user and the current page user? If you're ever building a feature that requires a user profile page, this is a fairly common dilemma that you're going to run into throughout that process. Well, in this video, I'm going to teach you everything there is to know about these two options. And by the end of this tutorial, you'll know exactly which option to select in each unique use case. We're going to cover everything from who the current user is, who the current page user is, who are you, who am I, and what is the meaning of life. Okay, I might have exaggerated a bit there. But thankfully, this one is a relatively straightforward process. So let's just grab our Bubble editor and we can dive right into it. Throughout our tutorial today, I'm going to be explaining the key difference between both the current user and the current page user option, which if you're relatively new to Bubble, it's going to be inevitable that you're going to run into this predicament at some point in time. Now, before I dive into anything throughout our tutorial today, what I've done is I've just created a quick checklist of everything I want to cover within this video. And by all means, creating a checklist is just a personal preference of mine. It just allows me to tick each item off as I walk you through the process. Now, if you'd like to get access to this checklist, of course, I'll be sure to include a link in the description of this video. So that way you can make a duplicate of this and follow along with me as we walk through each of these steps. Now, before we also jump in and start walking through the difference between these two options, what I'd actually like to do is first of all, just take a step back and talk about what actually causes both of these options to be displayed inside of Bubble. And of course, like anything, the best way to explain is just by showing you a real world example. So if we were to jump into Bubble, I've just created this demo application. Now inside of this demo application, I have a couple of different pages. The first page here is just a page that's going to display a list of users in my database. So each of these cards here is going to display a user's profile photo, their name, and their bio. On this home page, however, whenever this view profile button is clicked, it's going to send us through to a profile page in our Bubble editor, in which case I'd like to view all of the information for this specific person that I've just selected. And so if I was to open up my page drop-down menu and head over to this page, this is where we're going to start to see both of those two options become present. So if you've had some time to become familiar with Bubble, you'll know that one of the most powerful features it offers is the ability to create dynamic pages. And so what do I mean by that? Essentially, let's say we had 1,000 users within our database, and we wanted to create a profile page for each one of those users. Theoretically, it's completely normal to understand that you might need to build 1,000 unique pages, so one for every single user. But thankfully, in Bubble, you have the ability to create one profile page from which you can choose to display the data of one particular user at a time. So instead of building out 1,000 profile pages, we'll just create one page. And whenever someone wants to view someone's profile, we're going to send through the data of that person and then display it on this page. And so if you're creating a dynamic page in Bubble, a core requirement for that is to open up your property editor for the page itself. So you'll see when I double click on the page here, it opens up my profile page. Now to enable the feature that actually allows you to create a dynamic page, you'll need to store a type of content on the page. So these types of content link to the actual data types you've created in your database. So you can see from my application today, I have two existing data types. There's our users, which of course is a data type that comes by default in any Bubble app. But then I also have this data type known as a post. So in my application today, users are going to be able to create posts, kind of like a social network. But if we wanted to create a dynamic user profile page, we'd need to set the type of content on this page to be a user. So that way Bubble now knows that at any point in time, we're using this page to display a specific user. And now it's at this very point that you'll now have the option to reference both either the current user or the current page user. And that of course is why you've clicked on this video today. So on my user profile page here, let's say I want to add in the details of the person whose profile we're viewing. So in my example, I've just added a text element here. And I'd like to insert some dynamic data and display the name of the person whose profile I'm currently looking at. If I was to remove this static text and choose to insert dynamic data, bada bing, bada boom, here are our two options that of course have left you completely baffled. Now to simplify the difference between these two options here, the easiest way to explain it is by putting you in an example. So let's say you're using my application today and you'd like to go and view my profile. So you've obviously logged into your account, You've selected my profile photo from the main page, which I just shown you. And let's say you've been sent over through to this profile page. So once again, you want to view my information. You would technically be the current user because you are the person who's currently logged in viewing my page, which means that I would then be the current page user because I'm the user who's being displayed on the page. So you just need to remember that the person who is always logged in and is doing something will always be the current user. Whereas as the name would suggest, the current page user is the user being displayed on the page. So if based on that example, I wanted to display the information of me, remembering that you're viewing my profile, I would need to reference the current page user. And then of course, because this is linked to our user data type, I can then add in any data field that sits within that. So in this case, I'd like to display their name. I'll then just jump ahead and show you how to do it for the user's bio. So once again, I would insert dynamic data and reference the current page user, and in this case, their bio. And so just like that, you now know the difference between who the current user is and who the current page user is. But of course, like anything in Bubble, just when you think you're getting the hang of it, it's of course much more complex than that. I hope you didn't think it was going to be that easy. What I'd just like to point out is the scenario in which the current user can also be the current page user. And in that situation, I want to talk about what's going to happen. So when would the current user also be the current page user? Let's say if I jump back to my homepage and I'm logged into my account. So I'm currently logged in as Lachlan Kirkwood. And within our list of users here, let's say I see myself and I want to check out my own profile. Now, why would anyone want to check out their own profile? Let's be completely real. We all do it. I'm always checking out my Instagram profile, admiring that nice feed that I've created. And so it's always nice to get a snapshot of what your profile looks from someone else's perspective. So let's say once again, I want to go and view my own profile. If I was to click this view profile button, it would send me through to our profile page. And of course, that would mean that Lachlan Kirkwood would be the current page user. But because I'm also logged in as Lachlan Kirkwood, that would also make me the current user. So when it comes to displaying the current user's information on this page, thankfully, you don't have to change any of this dynamic data. So because you yourself would still be the current page user, all of your information is going to display correctly here. You don't need to all of a sudden change this to be the current user, because in this case, the current user is in fact also the current page user. Now, there's a few additional things I should just point out here. And if you're relatively new to Bubble, this is going to be quite helpful in understanding how we can actually send data between pages. So if we've taken the time to set a type of content on the page, so this was my user data type. Anytime you run a navigation event inside of Bubble, it's now going to force you to send through the data of a user to this page. And the reason for that is because Bubble's already established that you'd like to display the information of a user on this page. So in order to open this page, Bubble needs to know which user it should show. So if I jump back to my index page, which is just my home page here, and if I was to select my view profile button and choose to run a workflow, within this workflow, I'd obviously like to send us through to our profile page. And of course, what you'll find is that because we have the user data type on that page, Bubble's going to request which user we should be displaying the information for. So if I jump into my actions here, select from the navigation actions and choose the go to page event. I'm going to set the destination page to be my profile page. And what you'll now see is that we have to send some data through to that page. Now the data you send through will need to match the same type of content that was stored on the page. So on our profile page, if we set the type of content to be a user, we need to also send through the data of a user. And in this case, the data I would like to send through is the user whose profile we're currently viewing, which in this case is just going to be the parent group's user. Now, I've also just realized that this actually might throw you off as well because that is another option. Essentially, in my design tab here, I just have a repeating group of users. And then inside each repeating group cell, I have a group that contains all of the information for each of those users. And so because all of my elements here sit inside of a group, this group is also fetching the data from the repeating group. So essentially the repeating group is just passing it through all of the layers down to our individual elements. And so that just means that because these elements sit inside of a group, that group is known as the parent group. But it would pretty much be the exact same as selecting the current cell's user. So please don't let that throw you off too much. But at this point, that would now send us through to our profile page. And on this page, it's going to display the information of a particular user whose profile we want to view. But before we wrap up this tutorial, there is one very last thing I just want to explain. And that is actually how we can restrict features to users viewing their own profile. So at the bottom of our profile information here, what you'll see is I have this little text element which just displays the words edit profile. Now, if I was viewing someone else's profile, I obviously shouldn't be able to edit the information of that person's profile. But if I was viewing my own, I should be able to see this text and of course make changes to that. So that essentially just means that I don't want this text element to be visible on this page unless the current user is viewing their own profile, which means that the current user would also be the current page user. And so how could we create that experience and restrict this to only that person? What we could do is head over to our layout tab here, and we could start by hiding this element on our page. So if I was to unselect that this element should be visible on page load, it's now going to be hidden. I could also select this option to collapse this element when it's hidden. And that just means that it's not going to take up any empty space on our page when it's not visible to someone. Now from here, we could jump over to our conditional tab and we could define a condition. And within this, I'd just like to recognize when the current user is viewing their own profile, in which case I would like this element to now be visible. And so what I'm going to do is first of all just select from the current page user. So I'm going to do this almost in reverse to what I just said. So I'm going to recognize when the current page user, so that is the person whose profile information is being displayed on this page. I'm then going to scroll on down and reference when the current page user is the current user. So that means someone is logged in viewing their own profile, in which case I would like to select that this element should be visible and I will tick that that should be true. Now, if I was to just run a quick preview of my application and show you how this functions, what you'll see is that when we view someone else's profile, this text element here will not be visible. Whereas when we view our own profile, it will then be displayed to me, from which I can then select this to go on and edit my own profile information. Over in a preview of my application here, you can see that I'm currently logged in as myself. So Lachlan Kirkwood. If I was to scroll on down our list of users here though, let's say I want to view the profile of Emily Jones here. So if I was to click on this button, it would send us through to our profile page, and it would also send through the data of Emily as the user. So now that means that Emily has become the current page user. So that's why I can see a list of all of Emily's information, as well as a series of all of Emily's posts that she's created. So you'll see that these are all of the posts in our database where Emily was the creator. One thing you won't see on this profile, however, is the ability to edit the details of Emily's profile. So because I'm logged in as my own account, being Lachlan Kirkwood, that means that I, the current user, am not obviously Emily Jones. So I don't have the ability to edit this profile. However, if I was to jump back to my homepage, and if I was to then view the details of Lachlan Kirkwood, who of course is myself as I'm logged in as him, what you'll see is that Lachlan Kirkwood has become the current page user, but of course I am also the current user, which means that I now see this text here to edit my own profile. And that is the exact experience we wanted to create. So this is just a real world example of how you can actually understand not only the current user and the current page user, but you can also start to take advantage of things like when the current user is also the current page user. Now, if I was to just jump back to my Notion checklist here, I'm just going to tick off that we first of all covered what causes the current page user option to be displayed. We then ran through the process of what the difference was between the current user and the current page user. I then explained how we could insert the relevant dynamic data for the current page user, how we could send the data of a user through to that page. And of course, at the end, I explained the real world example of when the current user could also be the current page user. So I truly hope that I've covered absolutely every last detail you needed, so that way you have no questions left after this tutorial. I remember when I started working in Bubble, this really confused me to begin with. So please don't stress if you are also confused about the difference between these two options. And just like that, you now know the difference between the current user and the current page user. So hopefully this just helps simplify the whole process of building out features like a user profile page inside of your Bubble application. Look, if you found this video helpful and you wanted to stay up to date with any additional Bubble tutorials I share, I'd always recommend hitting that subscribe button so that way you can be the first to know whenever I drop a new video. In the meantime though, I just wanted to say a massive thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video, and I wish you all of the best on your own no-code journey.